Tanaiste, on Tuesday, Wilbur Ross and Fairfax sold some of their shares in Bank of Ireland. They bought the shares for 600 million, and those shares are now worth just over 1.9 billion, so a gain of about 1.3 billion euro. Now, there's no issue as such with this profit. These investors saw an opportunity, they've taken it, and they've made a killing. But what is at issue, Tanaiste, is what Bank of Ireland is doing on the ground every day that's driving up this share price. Because when it comes to resolving the mortgage crisis, Bank of Ireland is squeezing Irish families harder than any other bank. Now, every TD in this Dáil is trying to help families who are struggling to repay mortgages. And one of the first questions we always ask these families is, who's the bank? Because we know that if the bank happens to be Bank of Ireland, then the chances of these families having a successful outcome is much less. Now, Tanaiste, here's some of Bank of Ireland's response to the Finance Committee on their sustainable solutions. Deferred interest, not a Bank of Ireland solution. Payment moratorium, not a Bank of Ireland solution. Permanent interest rate reduction, not a Bank of Ireland solution. Bank of Ireland is the only bank that charges interest on the shelved portion of the split mortgage. And Richie Boucher has admitted to the Finance Committee that in over 90% of the offers they make, the family will end up paying more money back to the bank. So let's just join the dots. Bank of Ireland is squeezing struggling Irish families harder than any other bank. The result for shareholders is profit, but the result for many Irish families is disaster. For many families, Tanaiste, struggling to pay their mortgage, the difference between financial recovery and financial ruin is whether or not they bank with Bank of Ireland. Now, in your speech on Tuesday, Tanaiste, you laid out 4 principles that we should act by. Sustainable prosperity, shared prosperity, a threshold of decency and openness and transparency. And I wholeheartedly agree with all 4 of those principles.
Please. Thank you.
But I put it to you, Taoiseach, that by standing idly by and allowing Bank of Ireland do what it continues to do, you are violating your own principles. The government could solve this problem very simply by providing a standardised set of solutions to be used by all banks. So my question, Tanaiste, is this. Will you continue to allow Bank of Ireland continue to squeeze Irish families, or will you stand by those excellent principles and insist on a standard set of solutions for all families looking to resolve their mortgages and apply fairness and consistency?
Thank you. Tanaiste.
Well, first of all, can I thank Deputy Donnelly for agreeing the 4 principles which I set out in my speech here on Tuesday for what I believe is the way forward. Now that we have come out of the bailout, now that we're seeing jobs being created again, we're seeing the economy growing again, I think that we do have to look now over the next couple of years about the question of for whom is this recovery, because as I said on Tuesday, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the government is concerned, recovery is not just about getting the numbers right, it's about making sure that recovery becomes real for people. In relation to Bank of Ireland, I think we do have to, cast our minds back to where we were 3 years ago when those shares were bought. 3 years ago, when those shares were bought, the banks were at the point of collapse. The reality was that there was nobody out there who wanted to buy shares in an Irish bank. As part of the process of recapitalisation of the Irish banks, the Irish taxpayer, the state, has invested 4.8 billion in Bank of Ireland. That investment has, from the state's point of view, has performed well, and 6 billion has now been returned to the state through sales and guarantee fees. And in addition, the state's ownership of the shareholding that the state still has in Bank of Ireland, which is 14% of Bank of Ireland, is now valued at 1.5 billion. So in terms of, when we talk about, what the taxpayer has done for the banks, in the case of Bank of Ireland, we're seeing a return on it. Now, you raised the issue of the addressing of mortgages. And as far as the government is concerned, we expect that all banks deal with mortgage holders fairly and deal with those who are in distress in a fair way. We have seen in the last CSO figures, for the first time in 5 years now, a drop in the number of people in arrears of more than 90 days. I think that's a welcome turn, and I'd like to see that, continued. We have seen also in the order of about 86,000 mortgages that have now been restructured. We know that just short of 80% of those restructures are holding. And we expect that the Bank of Ireland, the same as every other bank and every other institution, deal on a case-by-case basis and deal in a fair way with people who are still in mortgage arrears and who still have difficulties with their mortgages. And the government will continue to pursue that policy with the banks and through the central bank.
Thank you. Deputy Donnelly.
Thank you, Tanaiste. The problem is that policy isn't working. It isn't working. Anyone on the Finance Committee will tell you that. Any member of Dáil Éireann will tell you that. Bank of Ireland is acting in a completely different way. Let me give you a quick example. There's a family I'm dealing with in Wicklow right now. They can't make full capital and interest payments. They can make partial capital payments, full interest, and their business is beginning to grow again. Now, Bank of Ireland has written to them and said, we're not offering you any sustainable solution. We're taking you out of the MARP process. You've got to make full capital and interest payments, which they know they can't, or we're going to repossess your house. Now, I've gone through the detail of this. If this family was with AIB, AIB would say, we're going to offer you a split mortgage, you're going to reduce your capital payments, and if they're not fully covered by the time you retire, we're going to offer you a debt for equity swap. The family stays in the house, they get on with raising their kids and growing their business. That's what's meant to happen, and that's what would happen if they had happened to borrow from AIB. But they didn't. They borrowed from Bank of Ireland. So Bank of Ireland is going to do two things. It's going to evict them, and then it's going to pursue them for the residual debt so that it can continue to drive its share price, so that the shareholders can continue to cash in. That's the reality on the ground, and that's what has to stop. Bank of Ireland has made it crystal clear, Richie Boucher has made it crystal clear to the Finance Committee that he's not going to play nice in the way that you want him to. Now, this government could stop this in a heartbeat. All you've got to do is say we now have solutions that are being used by AIB and by various other people. These are the solutions that must be used. Bank of Ireland, you must use this. My question, Tanaiste, and please address it, it is so important for so many families being destroyed by Bank of Ireland at the moment. My question is, will the government not ask Bank of Ireland to play nice, but insist that they apply the same levels of debt solution that the other banks are doing? It is a huge potential win for the government, but much more importantly, for thousands of families around the country. Thank you.
Tanaiste.
Well, first of all, of course, the debt solutions that you are referring to, Deputy Donnelly, are debt solutions that were promoted by the government in the first place. Over the course of the past couple of years, we have given priority to dealing with the mortgage crisis that many people are experiencing. And over that period of time, we have introduced and discussed with the banks a range of measures which can be taken to address the mortgage problems that people are facing, including the introduction of the Personal Insolvency Service, including the arrangements for split mortgages, for a whole variety of approaches which can be taken by institutions with mortgage holders to avoid a situation that people are put out of their home. We made it very clear from the very beginning of this crisis that the one thing that we wanted to avoid was people losing their homes. And in fact, I expressed on a number of occasions that in many ways, I think during the period of the recession, probably the biggest fear that people had, families had, was that they would, not so much that they'd lose the job or the business, but that they'd lose their home. And that is why we put in place a range of options and a range of measures which can be used by all financial institutions in order to deal with the mortgage problems that individuals have had. And indeed I recall repeatedly, when coming in here and answering questions about mortgage issues and putting these options forward and saying this is what was going to be done, that very often that approach was being derided. So I'm glad to see now that, Deputy Donnelly, that you are advocating that banks should use the instruments and use the methods that government has advocated in the first place.
Thank you.
And of course, Of course, let's be clear about this. Bank of Ireland should use those options the same as every other financial institution.
Thank you. That completes leadership.